What is up, NBA fans? I am Jason Burgos for SportsNot.com, and I have the great pleasure of being joined by one of the true stars in the sports reporting game, and that is Yahoo Sports senior NBA reporter Jake Fischer, who joins us from the NBA Combine. Senor Fischer, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you so much. I'm not at the Combine. I just got back, so I'm sleep deprived. I'm sick. I got a cough, but we spent all week out there in Chicago talking to executives and agents and a couple of players. So happy to fill you in on some things. What's going on?
I'm excited to talk about that, and I definitely have questions and want to get to that. But before we get to that, let's talk about what the NBA world is kind of focused on right now. The two conference finals matchup we have going on. First, let's talk about Lakers Nuggets. The Lakers always have high expectations, obviously, from their brand and the franchise's history. But in a way, it almost feels like they're kind of ahead of schedule a little bit. Brand new head coach, very different system, remodeled team at the trade deadline in a lot of ways. Like, they probably shouldn't be this good maybe so far, so quickly in a way. It's arguable or not. But is there more pressure maybe on the Nuggets to win, to get to the finals, two-time MVP, up 2-2? Do you feel like in some way is there pressure on the Nuggets, or it's always Lakers got to get there like the Yankees got to get there?
I mean, both teams are facing their similar amount of expectations, right? Where the Lakers, they have 38-year-old LeBron James. He's a large reason why they're in this position, and they have no guarantee of how much longer he'll be around at this level of capacity, at this strength of his power still, while dealing with an injured foot. And we haven't seen players act at the top of their skills level like he has this late in his career, really throughout the history of the NBA. We've seen Vince Carter play into year 40 and Dirk play into year 40, but like those guys did not have nearly the same level of impact that deep into their respective careers. So on the flip side, Denver, I don't think feels any pressure really to like maximize what this opportunity is. I think they're here to prove that they are the number one seed in the West, and for good reason. And sure, like, will there be repercussions potentially involved? Will there be, a lot of disappointment from a team that is the number one seed in the West if they don't make it through? Yes, but I don't know. The pressure aspect, I think it feels like it's more on Los Angeles because they do need to capitalize while LeBron is still there. Denver, I mean, they want to break through. They are confident that they can prove all these naysayers wrong. It's interesting that this has kind of been framed as like the Lakers series, even though they're down 2-0. So we'll see as we shift to Los Angeles, if the Nuggets can take one of these games where the Lakers have not lost, they have not lost on their home floor in these playoffs. So if Denver can be the first to do it, then they're going to be heading home 3-1, and I think this series can be done pretty quickly. But the Lakers can take two. We're probably in for a long series.
Yeah. Does Darvin Ham's success for such a big brand like the Lakers, like I mentioned, does that show should it show more teams need to kind of give opportunities to like these really well-respected assistants instead of kind of recycling former head coaches like the league has always seemed to do, probably going to do again with a lot of job cuts recently? Should that be a message, and if it is the message, do you think the league will see that message of giving more good assistants chances?
I don't think that's necessarily the message, but you're right in that it's kind of bucking a recent trend where look at Milwaukee and Phoenix and Philadelphia right now. Yep. The Bucks fired Mike Budenholzer after losing in the first round. The Suns fired Monty Williams after losing in the second round to those Denver Nuggets. Philadelphia fires Doc Rivers after losing in Game 7 to Boston. And all three of those names are candidates at the other positions in theory. We don't really know for sure that Doc is really on Milwaukee's radar, but the Bucks have canvassed the league. They've reached out to candidates from overseas. A former G League head coach named Will Weaver is currently a coach in Paris right now. He's been interviewed by both Milwaukee and Toronto. So if the Bucks are casting such a wide net, to Kelvin Sampson down at the Houston Cougars, to a Washington Wizards assistant named Joseph Blair, like, if they're looking at all these types of candidates, why wouldn't they at least give Doc Rivers a look? So you're right. The fact that, we could just see, Nick Nurse in Philadelphia and Bud in Phoenix and Monty in Milwaukee, it is a little bit frustrating, I think, and disappointing that there aren't much more opportunities for first-time head coaches. Like Kevin Young is the associate head coach at Phoenix, where he was the last couple of seasons. From everything I've heard, he's got great respect and admiration from key Suns players like Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. So why wouldn't he have a chance at moving up and taking over that first seat, just like Nick Nurse did in Toronto, and he helped them win a championship his very
Yeah.
first season in 18-19.
Yep.
So I'm with you. I think there definitely needs to be greater opportunity for lesser-known coaches around the NBA.
Now, moving on to the Heat Celtics, there have been a whole bunch of rumors about Jaylen Brown's future in Boston, stuff like that, based off kind of comments he's made indirectly. If they were to come up short against the 8-seeded Heat, does that kind of like expedite that possibility of him being somewhere else? And if that comes to pass, how seriously do you think Boston might consider even a summer trade heading into the last year on his contract? And, maybe there's a thought that his value is high in the summer than a trade deadline. Like, do you think all that talk is possible if they lose, or it's kind of just all hubbub?
I'm sure that if they lose, Boston will receive plenty of inbound calls about Jaylen Brown's availability.
Yeah.
But one thing that that hasn't really been a giant talking point really from my conversations at this juncture of the offseason, just being that him being selected to an all-NBA team, I believe he was named second team all-NBA. For him to get onto one of those 3 all-NBA teams was all he needed to do in order to qualify for a Supermax extension, which he's only eligible to attain with the team that drafted him, the Boston Celtics. So that kind of suggested to a lot of rival teams that he will be signing that deal and be sticking around in Boston. The flip side is that's going to be a very lucrative contract, and Jason Tatum will be up for his own extension in the very near future. The Celtics could be paying upwards of $600 million just for those 2 guys, not on an annual basis, but over the stretch of the next 5 years. And that's a very large tally figure, especially considering these new CBA rules that are coming into effect on June 30th at 6 p.m. when the calendar flips effectively to the 23-24 season. It's going to be harder and harder and more restrictive for teams with massive cap, salary sheets, especially teams that go into this new second apron. Teams like Milwaukee and the Clippers and Golden State and Philadelphia are all facing a similar, tax crunch upcoming here. So for Boston, maybe they do decide, even though we'll give Jaylen Brown this contract, maybe there is a point where they do decide we don't think this pairing is worth this monetary amount in order to keep these guys here together in Celtics green. So there is a chance, I think, even though that contract, some people are looking at it as, just a shut locked door key, situation where Jaylen Brown won't be leaving. I'm not here, predicting he's going to get moved. I don't think there's going to be a bidding war for Jaylen Brown this summer necessarily, but I think anything is going to be on the table this year when teams are really evaluating how to attack these new CBA rules, and guys like Jaylen Brown are going to be up for new contracts.
I think like these playoffs, once again, as a Knick fan, prove Eric Spoelstra is a fantastic head coach. Why does he not seem to get the respect? I know he gets respect, but he doesn't get like Ty Lue gets a lot of talk. Eric Spoelstra should be getting a lot of talk. Why does he not get that respect? And as from your expertise as a NBA analyst and stuff like that, what's he doing with this roster that's maxing them out and beating teams that they probably weren't better than in these first 2 rounds? What is he doing that's like so successful with these players?
Yeah, I think what you said, maxing out this roster, is the key. What Eric Spoelstra is known for is he puts his particular players and their particular skill sets in particular positions in order to be effective as a collective unit. He is not trying to fit his system or his players to his system. He's trying to mix and match. When Boston in game 1 took out Jason Tatum for a little bit of a stretch, they went to his own defense very quickly, and tried to feast on the fact that Boston didn't necessarily have like a true key lead ball handler on the floor at that moment. They are very, very, very talented and dexterous there in developing young players to fit their culture, to understand, like, the fact that Gabe Vincent and Kyle Lowry have both accepted their respective positions of Gabe being the starter and Kyle Lowry being this all-star veteran, pretty much a future Hall of Famer, to come off the bench. And you've kind of resuscitated Kevin Love. The Cleveland Cavaliers thought Kevin Love was left for dead,
Yeah.
and he ends up starting for Miami throughout this playoff run. He hasn't been fully consistent throughout this entire playoffs, but he's been a very valuable contributor. So I think that's really his secret sauce. And to your point about why he might not be getting enough attention for it, he's not asking for it. He's not
Yeah.
wearing a hat where he's got his initials on it and his whole branded thing like certain coaches do. He's not out here
Yeah.
pounding the podium asking for his respect, and he just kind of goes about his business. He doesn't want to talk to the media. When I was around the Heat for that Knicks Heat series, pretty much at every practice or afternoon media availability when the team PR was kind of lingering over his direction and saying, "Hey, it's your time to come over to the scrum," he didn't want to do it before Game 5. He walked into the press conference area underneath Madison Square Garden, sat down, looked at the crowd, looked at the assembled media, asked if there were any questions. No one had one, so he just got up and left, which
Wow.
kind of badass. So that's kind of, I think, the secret sauce to Eric Spoelstra.
And I mean, it's very much like mad scientist kind of guy. I love it, jealous of it, envious of it. If you had to gut pick right now, who do you think is playing in the finals in June between these four teams?
Right now, I'm going to choose Denver versus Miami. I think the Nuggets have a clear advantage over the Lakers in terms of depth and shooting. And they've been able so far to really withstand minutes without Nikola Jokic on the floor. And no matter what, the Rui Hachimura assignment, I think, got so much attention, but
Yeah.
Jokic still was able to do Jokic things out there. I think Miami, and with Jimmy Butler and Eric Spoelstra pulling those strings, like you're saying, I just believe in their ability to show up time and again and finish games more so than Boston. And if you want to get ahead of ourselves there, like I really think this is Denver's year. I covered a bit of that series against Phoenix. I went to Game 5 in Denver and Game 6 in Arizona, and seeing them up close, I left very struck and impressed by how seamless of a machine that the Nuggets really are. And I think they're going to roll all their way to their first championship here.
Now let's talk about the draft where you were at, got sick from, unfortunately. Everybody is talking about Victor Wembanyama. We have, even our site has done quite a few pieces on him as well. And everybody seems so high on him. For what you have seen, just maybe in your own analysis, what have people were talking about at the combines, been talking about in the league in general the last few weeks, is the hype legit and warranted? Or are people kind of jumping the gun a little bit with like the LeBron connections and comparisons?
The hype is very real, I believe. I went to Las Vegas in early October when Victor came stateside to play against G League Ignite, and at the time, the presumptive number 2 pick in Scoot Henderson. And the guy is just so talented. He's 7'4", but he handles the ball like a guard. He shoots it off the dribble. He can defend at the rim. He can be a pick and roll partner for a guard. If you've watched any of his games in the NBA app over the last couple of months, he might be the most effective pick and roll lob threat I've ever seen. He just sticks his hands up and he can kind of, his catch radius around the rim will make any wide receiver blush. He's that good. And there's questions about his frame and his frailness, and will he be able to put on the muscle mass to compete in the paint against guys like Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid and Giannis Antetokounmpo and Anthony Davis and Bam Adebayo and down the list. But he's 19 years old. I think we saw how Giannis filled out his body. Yep. I think there's not really a lot of skepticism from teams I've talked to about his ability to mature physically. And the thing that gets me the most excited about him is all that stuff, all that physical ability. It's wrapped up with a bow and a brain and a humility of someone like Giannis, someone like Steph Curry, someone like Tim Duncan. This rare kind of ability to be confident that you're the man, but not be arrogant about it, and kind of understand the task at hand, that the franchise's ultimate success is going to fall on your shoulders. But in order to do that so well, you need to lift up others around you. I think he's got that super, super rare ability to have perspective on all things basketball.
Yeah, and then that's exciting. Yeah, the brain of it. I mean, he's playing with men over there. I know they're not, maybe as talented as college kids, but these are grown men. It's a different kind of game, more physical kind of game. But speaking of success, stuff like that, the Spurs. And speaking of a team envious of, like always as a Knicks fan, got lucky again. Have the chance to get a first round pick. They get it again. Landed a top pick. They're gonna get a Wembanyama in June for sure. They have a bunch of money this summer. Some good draft assets. That's assets too. Could they like have a playoff contender roster like right away around Victor for next season? And like, do they use some of this money to try to get him some veteran help, some people that can teach him further his game? For example, do they maybe make a trade for like a Chris Paul? He's been great with young big men in the past and stuff like that. Do you think there's any names they might target, knowing that, man, this guy's good enough, we can be in playoffs next year?
If they're making a move like bringing on Chris Paul, I think that'd be more along the lines of what Detroit did last year with Bojan Bogdanovic, where they
Mhm.
trade, I think it was a second round pick and Kelly Olynyk and another contract to Utah just to bring on a veteran, a legitimate all-star caliber talent. I
Yeah,
think people don't recognize how good Bojan Bogdanovic really is.
yeah,
Um, and he really allowed the Pistons to have a lot more spacing in their offense, to have like a true legitimate NBA starting caliber weapon in their starting lineup to have alongside their young core of Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey, and Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart and other guys. Obviously, Cade got hurt, and that kind of cut that season short. But I think along those lines, any addition to the Spurs would be more of like some veteran savvy, some veteran know-how from
mm,
people I know around the organization. I don't think they're expecting to really charge back up the conference standings and make a push for the playoffs in like earnest next season. If they're floating around the play-in picture and it's a fun season and they exceed expectations, that'd be great. But I don't think the Spurs are like Detroit or Houston or Orlando or Charlotte,
yeah.
um, or Portland. These other teams at the bottom of the standings that definitely have legitimate and defined aspirations of taking a step forward and competing next season.
It seems like the top three, a lot of people belief of the draft for this year. It's Wembanyama, Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson. But for fans of like the Rockets, Pistons, Magic, Wizards, even the Mavericks that are in back past the top three spots in the back of the top 10, are there players that have that stood out when you were there at the combine, that could land in those possible spots in the rest of the top 10 that could be difference makers next season for teams that you saw at the combine yourself or just hearing around the league that people need to look for?
Yeah, I think this draft's really focused on the top three right now, with Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson. Brandon Miller being the wing from Alabama, and Scoot being that point guard from G League Ignite we talked about earlier in that matchup against Victor in October. Outside of those two guys, the Thompson twins, Amen and Asor Thompson from Overtime Elite, people are excited about them. But beyond that, beyond those five names, and I'm not sure the Thompsons are going to go back to back at 4 and 5, but it's certainly possible. But beyond those five names, there's a lot I think left to be determined, and figured out about this draft. Jordan Hawkins was a strong riser. People like Cam Whitmore from Villanova. There's plenty of other names like Anthony Black to keep an eye on. But in terms of like risers right now or other guys to really be monitoring, I think it's still early in the process. The combine mostly was participating in terms of the 5-on-5 scrimmage action. That was mostly full of like fringe first round pick, primarily second round pick type talent. At this point in the combine's history, if you're considered like a bona fide top 20 candidate right now, those guys just don't even take the floor. Some of them do measurements. That's going to change in the new CBA where every
Yeah,
prospect will be required to go do medical
yeah.
testing, but they still won't be required to be on the court. So for now, I
Mm.
think we're going to have to wait until these prospects all leave Chicago, start heading to all these cities and going into market for individual team workouts, and then we'll start to see if there's anybody else to keep an eye on.
Going to the mention, talking about the Rockets, stuff like that. There's been all these rumors, all kinds of rumors. James Harden is a target for them, but maybe he stays now that Doc Rivers is gone. Based on like what you've heard and just on your knowledge of the industry and stuff like that, is it inevitable? Is he's going to go chase the bag, which he's often done. It's just probably his last big contract of his career, despite want to be on a contender team. Does it seem like inevitable he might go back to the Rockets, who have the most money available this offseason, or maybe he ended up staying with a chance to win a title, hopefully with 76ers?
Yeah, at this point, I don't know what to believe. For a long time, I've been operating under the assumption that Harden's going to go to Houston. A lot of people around that situation have been kind of speaking as if it's a foregone conclusion. But the Sixers, I can tell you very confidently, they have not proceeded forward. They are not acting like it's a done deal. They definitely want to bring him back. I think firing Doc Rivers was in large part due to the relationship with James Harden and the fact that they did not exactly see eye to eye. There were other reasons too. The Sixers definitely wanted a new voice. They definitely, I think there's been a general criticism I've heard of Doc for his failure to experiment with different lineups in the regular season when games don't necessarily matter as much, so that when you get to the postseason, you have other levers to pull when certain lineups and other matchups just aren't exactly working in your favor. So there was plenty of other reasons, but I think definitely the relationship with James Harden, where after the Game 7 loss, Joel Embiid went to pretty great lengths in supporting of Doc Rivers.
Yeah.
James
Yep.
Harden said their relationship was just okay. So
Yeah.
I think that was definitely a factor. I know Sixers assistants who, most of them probably will be out of a job here as Doc Rivers is being terminated. They believe that Harden was a driving force in Rivers being let go. So I think that's something to monitor. And I do think there's a chance he goes back just because it doesn't make a ton of sense for someone at this stage of his career who in theory cares about winning to go back to a Houston team that's had one of the worst records in the league for 3 straight seasons now
Yeah.
and no other infrastructure there. If the Rockets are able to maybe trade this number 4 pick or trade another young piece on their core and add another running mate alongside of James, kind of a similar version to how Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, tag team went to Brooklyn in free
Yeah.
agency. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George did the same in LA. If Harden can find another guy that wants to go with him to Houston, I think that makes it a lot more realistic for the Rockets, and I think that's something that Houston's definitely working on here in the coming weeks before free agency begins.
Just have a few more questions. Thank you again so much for the time. Really appreciate it, especially you dealing with the sickness and everything. Now there have been sort of rumbling suggestions, speculation, kind of linking maybe Carl Anthony Towns to the Knicks. That maybe that possibility, maybe he's on the block and stuff like that. The Knicks obviously kind of need another star. Julius Randle, very good player, but when the time to come, playoff time, he's not really rising to the occasion, and that's the big issue. Rising to the occasion of playoffs again to the next level. Do you think they try and make a big move this summer for maybe a Karl Anthony Towns, or maybe after a good season they get back to the playoffs, they have these nice building blocks like with Jalen Brunson? Are they a little bit more conservative, which will disappoint Knicks fans? But are they more conservative? Maybe wait till a team and a player's a little more desperate at the trade deadline.
No, they're gonna look. I mean, they were right at the front line trying to acquire Donovan Mitchell, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, they fell short of that, and I think a lot of their calculus was that they didn't want to expunge all their draft capital for someone that they thought there was still going to be a lot of room left to be desired to add more All-Star caliber talent, and they beat Donovan Mitchell in the first round of the playoffs. So I think absolutely they're going to try and they'll call Philly. They'll call Minnesota. They'll call LA about Paul George. I think the Knicks are going to call far and wide to try to see what their draft capital can acquire and maybe a mix of certain players on the roster. I'm not exactly sure at this moment where they stand on guys like RJ Barrett and Obi Toppin and Emmanuel Quickly, but all 3 of their names were definitely involved in talks for Donovan Mitchell back in last summer. So they'll have to give up young talent and young blue chip talent in addition to those draft picks if they do want to get a player, Joel Embiid or Karl Anthony Towns' magnitude. So that'll be up for negotiation, and we'll see if they're able to get anything over the finish line. But I definitely expect New York to be looking for opportunities to pounce.
Now you said Philly as a possible team to call. Now you're going to get Knicks fans excited. You're going to get me excited. Is there any actual chance? Like, I know people throwing out there, oh, maybe Embiid is the next star to go because if James Harden leaves, they really can't maybe add anybody free agency. They're in a tough spot. like, is there a chance? Are they going to call Philly like, hey, Joel's not maybe doing too well. He's not too happy. Is that a real possibility, or is that just a pipe dream for us Knicks fans?
It's only a possibility if Joel Embiid wants out, and
Mhm.
I'm not sure that's going to be the case. I mean, he's joked with me. I went down to Philly. When was it? I think it was like in late October, early November, and sat down with him for a couple of minutes. And he joked that Sixers fans want to trade him. So he's a troll. He knows how to have fun. He knows how to play with the
Yeah.
fan base, and he tweets out, things that stir the pot. So I'm never too certain to like where exactly his angle is coming from when he says things like that. But I'm sure other players are hitting him up to try to recruit him, or
Mm.
he's in that kind of realm where these guys are talking and seeing who wants to play together. But at this juncture, I'd be surprised if he requested a trade. I think this is where he wants to be. I think Philly is
Yeah.
where he wants to try to win a championship. And I think he's kind of taken it personally to be the guy to deliver Sam Hinkie's original vision, the
Mhm.
process
Yeah.
to that promised land. So, and until he finally decides that that's no longer what is his driving force and his motivation, then the trade request could be possible. But for now, I'm not expecting that to really be a reality.
Just last two questions. If you had to rank them, and these are the players that were rumored to be available, maybe the deadline could be available this summer, issues with their teams, whatnot, contractual, all these kinds of stuff. When it comes to Trae Young, DeMar DeRozan, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, even a DeAndre Ayton, a lot of talk about him lately. Who do you think's the most likely, and of those kinds of players, who do you think it's all just smoke, but there's really no fire to actually leaving those teams?
Yeah, I'd say OG Anunoby, but I will say that the new CBA rules, which I'm not going to get into the granular details because I'm gonna get them wrong off the top of my head. But take me at my word when I say that all of a sudden it's now become a lot easier for the Raptors to re-sign him, to extend him before he becomes a 2024 unrestricted free agent. Previously, it was the reason why DeJounte Murray got traded from San Antonio, and it was the reason why people were worried about Jaylen Brown, being that under the old regulations, teams were not able to sign players to an extension um, above 120% of their
Mm,
current salary. And OG's deal around 16, 17, 18 million dollars, um, that's not going to be close to his next range. And 120% of that wouldn't be enough for him to want to stick around in Toronto. So he would have had to wait until he became an unrestricted free agent if he wanted to return. And I think that prompts a lot of trade talk. So
mhm,
he's just going to have a lot of suitors. So I think Toronto, you know, keep an eye on Portland with the number 3 pick, and
mm,
Memphis as they're trying to continue to upgrade. Like I think the Knicks are another team to keep an eye on. If they don't get a big fish like a Cat or a Joel Embiid, like can they send a smaller package out for OG Anunoby and continue to build this thing brick by brick before that real number 1 star comes into the fold? Who's to say? So
yeah.
I think OG is a name to definitely keep an eye on, just being that Toronto absolutely took calls and made calls about him at the February trade deadline.
All right, last one. I mean, and since you mentioned Memphis, it seems like John Morant, all the talk is he's gonna get a major suspension now after this recent gun-toting video, get himself more in more trouble. Um, what's the conversation, maybe even at the combine or just here around the league and stuff like that, about this situation? Is it just like bewilderment? Is it maybe some people just not surprised based on this history he's kind of just been building for like a year plus at least? And are there people that think like the maybe you're putting some blame on the Grizzlies, like they just haven't done enough to get the message across? Like, you're blowing it. This is misbehavior, just unacceptable. Like, is there even talk about that?
Definitely some bewilderment about like the lack of just self-awareness. The fact
Yeah.
that, Adam Silver and the league basically told John Morant, don't do this again. And he did it again.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I can't. There's been talk about him getting suspended for as much as half a season or 50 games. I just don't see that happening.
Hmm.
They're not analogous situations at all. But Miles Bridges was suspended, formally in theory 25, 30 games for a pretty brutal domestic violence allegation.
Yeah.
What John Morant has done, showing a gun on Instagram Live multiple times now is not exactly smart. It's not exactly illegal either. So
It's true. It's
it's
true.
definitely a gray area. It's something that I think the league really is taking seriously, and they want to kind of um, figure out how to smooth this over moving forward. Let's say for someone that a lot of people are expecting and are believing could be one of the next faces of the NBA. I think there definitely will be some penalty for it, but I'm not expecting it to be anything up to like the doomsday magnitude that some people are talking about.